I get on their ass. Somebody's got to do it.
Better Offline.
This is Better Offline. I'm Ed Zitron. Today I'm joined by the wonderful Jason Kint, who has been at the Google Ads trial and multiple other FTC and DOJ related trials as well. Now, last week we had wonderful news. The Department of Justice won their antitrust trial against Google, saying they have a monopoly over ad tech. This is a wonderful time. And Jason, of course, last year was here for multiple episodes with us to walk us through the trial. He was there in person. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm good, Ed. Thank you. It's good to see decisions starting to come in from the courts on what we've been talking about.
And just to be clear, Jason is the CEO of Digital Content Next. I did not say that at the top. It's the professional podcast run by a professional. But so walk us through what the verdict was.
This is the ad tech case against Google that was in Virginia, to remind the listeners. And it was around Google having market power and monopoly power on the buy side, the sell side, and in the exchange, and then illegally using that monopoly power. The decision from the judge was that mostly in agreement with the plaintiffs, and it was a big win for the Justice Department, who worked really hard on this case, that they have monopoly power in the exchange, so where the auctions actually happen, and then on the publisher side with the ad server marketplace that determines what ads land on the page, and that they illegally tied those two products together. So the only part of the decision, which I think Google's trying to make to be a bigger deal than it probably is that the judge did not agree that there was this market on the buy side the way it was defined. And so
what does that mean in simpler terms?
In simpler terms, it could affect where remedies go, because there's not a finding that they illegally used monopoly power on the buy side with advertisers buying ads. And so,
but just they owned the technology to sell the ads and the ways in which it was I guess.
Yeah, they still. It's true that they have significant influence because they're the largest player on the buy side of ads, so where advertisers are actually buying the ads, but not that she didn't find that there was a formed legal market there that they abused. And so as we go through remedies discussions, I think it might be less likely that there's some sort of structural separation where they need to divest the buy side too. Although all this stuff's frankly going to get tangled together, and it will be a whole new ball game with remedies, especially with search remedies going on this week too. So go ahead. I
was going to say, so what are the remedies that the Department of Justice is actually seeking here?
On the ad tech case, on this case, it's a structural separation of their roles in the ad tech marketplace. And so that was very clear coming into the trial.
So just break it down for me, though. How would they break up Google in its current form? Is that even possible?
I mean, yes, absolutely. In the simplest way would be forcing Google to divest, which probably would mean spinning off to its shareholders rather than selling, because it's going to be such a valuable asset. But actually divesting,
like a separate company
that is the ad server marketplace. Yeah. And the exchange itself too.
So dumb guy question for you. What is an ad server in this case? How does this actually break down?
It's the technology that sits on the web pages or on the publisher side that actually makes the decision on what ad to serve on the page. So when you're browsing a web page or on an app, it's what's deciding to serve the ad.
And so Google ran that themselves. They ran that themselves, so they ended up prioritizing their own ads, I'm guessing?
Yes, that's the case. And so, in the findings, what's really interesting is that the judge very much agreed with and understood that Google's illegal conduct in terms of how they were able to manipulate auctions in ways that probably favored them and certainly harmed the publishers was a part of the finding. So, yeah.
And when you say they harm the publishers, is it just it wasn't possible to compete with Google on ads because Google both made ads and then had the platform that showed the ads to people?
She hit on a number of things that I think are going to be super interesting in the remedies. She hit on that Google was able to keep charging 20% of the exchange market. So they could take 20% of every single transaction, and that price never moved from 20% for the most part because of their monopoly power. But she also hit on all the ways that they can manipulate the auctions, which could end up being, that's a bigger issue. When you start thinking about the private lawsuits that are out there too, you get into, literally tens of billions of dollars of potential harm to publishers from auction manipulations.
And how were they manipulating auctions, just so we understand?
Well, the allegations were that, and this in what she addressed in the opinion were things like first look and last look, where they actually were able to see the prices ahead of time or at the end of the auction and make decisions based on the bids that they uniquely were able to do.
Which is so insane that they were able to, they basically set prices, get everyone to bid and then just immediately beat them. It's shocking. That's the thing. It's kind of flagrant.
So with last look, I think, I think I've hit on two things here. One of the last look, which I think the judge very much understood, because I can remember her, who was completely new to this marketplace. She totally got why that was an issue when she, last look, if you take to a silent auction where you put your little bids down in an envelope and everybody has kind of their secret bid, this would be like Google then at the end was able to look at everybody's bid, see what the highest bid was, and then bid higher if they wanted. That was last look. And there were a bunch of other things that stemmed from that. And she really seemed to understand it, which it's nice to see. So
kind of impressive to see a judge just pick up an entire subject matter like that.
I totally agree. You know who should be most scared, frankly, by this opinion is if I'm Facebook or Meta, who is counting on this idea that the judge in their case doesn't know or use social media and TikTok and Instagram, et cetera. It tells you once again that a judge that understands the law and sits there for 4 weeks plus all the pretrial stuff and listens to the evidence can understand these issues. And the most important ingredient, I think, was the Justice Department, who really understood the case in a way that they could dive deep and then explain it to the judge. And they succeeded to do that.
Mm-hmm. So it kind of reminds me, during some of the Google Ads trial things, you talked about the spaghetti thing, where they were trying to do this kind of sleight of hand thing, and they're like, it's too impossible to understand.
Nope.
It's too complex, and they turned it into that ridiculous thing.
That's right. They did. And that tells you that is not going to be a successful defense, is trying to confuse a judge who has never used it or would understand ad tech. That's not going to work. The Justice Department succeeded in explaining it. They kept it simple.
So what happens next? What are the next moves with this, Palm?
Well, a reminder, this is what's called the Rocket Docket, the Virginia district, Eastern District of Virginia. And so the judge moved really, really fast. That's why they have that name. This case was filed in January of 2023. And so we got to a trial, 18 months later, and a decision that took, frankly, the decision took a lot longer than anyone thought it was going to take to come out. People were starting to get nervous, but, it just took time. And she clearly wrote a really clear opinion, and it's very easy to read through. So that keeping in mind, I think she'll probably move fast. They have a meeting, I think it'll be tomorrow, in terms of what's the schedule going forward for remedies. And so I would expect the dates to all be in the next few months.
But what would the remedies be? So they would have to break off the three part, the ad side. They would have to break off the sell side. What are they going to have to do in theory? I realize you're just guessing.
I'm just guessing. The findings are clear enough that there's going to be structural separation that they're going to be pushing for. How the buy side gets handled is going to be really important, because a reminder, and this doesn't come out really in the proceedings as much, but the ad tech case is downstream from the search case. And the arguments were that the reason Google was able to dominate the buy side and the sell side in ad tech was because of the monopoly power in search. which we also have remedies now that started on Monday. And so these things are going to start to swirl together. And when you think about Google having to divest Chrome and some of the other remedies within the search case, it's quite possible that there'll be some larger settlement that will be proposed, or a larger structural separation that needs to play out between the two decisions.
So, as you've been hinting at, there was the verdict last year that Google did have a monopoly over search. How do you think that these two things are going to play together? You kind of got it there, but what are the ways in which this could go?
Well, the search decision was not. There were two monopolies that they were found to have abused. One was search. The other was search text ads. So it was the ads that we see in search, which is Google's largest business, right? And so just so I'm clear,
you're saying that there's the monopoly over a search engine and then the advertising on said search engine.
Exactly. And so, that advertising on said search engine is what allowed them, according to the Justice Department, to then dominate in the ad tech stack. And so I think that's the connection point between the cases, and will also start to be a part of the discussion in the remedies. Both cases involve network effects. Both cases involve using data to maintain market power and to abuse it.
Right. So the potential remedies, it sounds like, could be almost breaking up Google into multiple different companies.
With this case, the baby bells, idea of what happened to AT&T should be much more.
What happened there, just for the listeners?
They divided AT&T up into pieces, and so not just forcing them to divest one piece of their business. And so, with the ad tech case, again, there's settlements that can happen, there's appeals that will happen, but the argument for should Google have to divest not just its advertising ad tech business, but also other areas of its business, I think becomes much stronger. You can imagine Chrome, you can imagine Android, you can imagine YouTube.
Yeah. Actually, here's a good question for you. I know Chrome, and I'm sure many listeners know Chrome as a free browser, not really a business entity. How does selling off Chrome meaningfully help with the monopoly situation?
Chrome, Google's entire advertising business is based on targeting ads based on signals and data that it gathers from the various ways that it can touch the user. And so Chrome as a web browser is an incredible way to harvest data about how you're browsing the web and where you are, location, search, etc. And so, where Google believes it has permission to use that data to target ads and train into its machine learning and AI training, that is very valuable.
So this is, perhaps I'm very stupid. So Chrome collects data on your browsing habits for every user.
Not for every user. There's privacy, settings and all sorts of things you can do. You can go into incognito mode. But if Google is acting as your browser, it has access to your browsing history and what you're doing on the web. And they can, where they believe they have the rights, they can use that data to help, provide further information on both for search, but also for, what content to serve up and what ads to serve up. What they're actually doing becomes a bigger question.
Right. So, and was that established at all at trial?
It was in the search case that. But it was more specifically focused on the default settings for search from the browser, right? And so within Chrome, if you type in your location bar, you're always going to be doing a Google search. It's pretty clear that how that data then gets passed from the browser to the search engine.
Yeah, and if they have billions of users, then everyone is searching using Google because it's the default. That's so crazy. But the thing with Chrome as well is it isn't a revenue driver, is it? Like a direct source of revenue.
For Google, it's if you think about the search case again, I mean, Google was paying Apple, $25 billion. Let's say I'm estimating it was 20 billion a few years ago, but let's say $25 billion they were paying to Apple to be the default search on Safari and all of the access points on iOS. So Chrome technically is making revenue off of those search queries. It's just Google's paying itself, right? And so that's the issue.
Well, the reason I bring that up is one of the remedies, the idea of selling Chrome off. Why would you, like, what value would there be in Chrome if the whole value of it is to just be kind of a flume towards Google? Like a way to, like almost like a marketing arm of Google. If you sold off Chrome, surely it wouldn't have as much business value.
It wouldn't have as much business value to Google. The whole point would be it'd be an independent business that would be making decisions. I mean, technically a browser is supposed to be a user agent. It's supposed to be making decisions for the user and what they value, right?
Uh-huh.
So a new
I just
Chrome,
mean as an autonomous business. Like,
yeah.
Because right now it's not like people pay for credit. It just doesn't feel like that is a practical thing to do. Because if the whole value proposition of it is that it's a free product that makes Google money and it doesn't make any money for anyone else, or like it isn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it could make a decision to point to, a new Amazon search site or a
sure, but where they're going to get
somebody
the
else
money?
that gets into search, right? And get paid for it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like this could lead to, I'm not going to say the death of Google in the sense that Google will cease to be, but the death of modern Google as we know it.
It definitely, all leads towards a very different Google, whether it be structurally different or just being hamstrung by the appeals of all these cases. So,
I mean, I could not think of anyone who got more lucky than it being Good Friday than Google right now, because it's good. We're recording this on Good Friday, and it's like they didn't, like, the markets are closed, so they didn't immediately get the markets just pummeling them as they should, because they've lost both now. They don't, like, whatever appeals they may do are not going to really, I don't think they're going to stop everything.
Markets are complex. I would hesitate to wonder, to predict why the stock did what it did yesterday, even when the announcement came out. There are some arguments that having to divest parts of the business could actually create more value back to shareholders.
What value would that be?
Well, typically when you spin things off, you often see or you sell things, often the stock, can go up because of that. And so, is the sum of the parts worth more than the whole? Those questions all come into play. But that's all, that's all up to the markets. And sometimes the markets aren't as smart as we think they are, and they take time to understand and unpack things.
Yeah, I agree, and I've seen the same thing with CoreWeave recently, which is a company that has driven me insane. Onto more sane things, though. So when we're recording this, it's going to be next week, but the beginning of the remedies for the search trial is on the 21st. So what can people expect there?
I don't think there's going to be as much excitement and drama as we saw with the actual liabilities trial. I think, for the folks that follow the industry closely, what you should expect is all the AI companies are involved. And so either through depositions, discovery, and some testifying. So you've got Anthropic, OpenAI, Microsoft. So when you think about the shaping of the AI world going forward, you're going to have all the major players. Apple tried to actually intervene but the judge didn't allow them. So they've got a strong interest because they've got estimated to be, I think, 10 to 15% of their profits are tied to their Google deal.
Right.
And so
because Google pays them to use, just for the listeners. So Google pays Apple billions to be the default search, right?
That's right. And the remedies are that they can't do that anymore. And so the reason they weren't allowed to intervene, according to Judge Mehta, was because he didn't see a difference in Apple's interests from Google's interests. He basically said,
"Yeah,
you have the same interests." Yeah. So,
well, I mean, the interest being that Apple needs Google to keep their monopoly, so that Apple can keep getting a chunk of their revenue.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, Yeah. So Apple cares a lot. Microsoft cares a lot. All the big players care. The testimonies is going to be a lot of experts and,
And
less CEOs. I think
who will be doing the testimonies?
it'll be experts from both sides, so academics that study these issues. It will be executives from the AI companies. I think we'll probably hear from Eddie Q again at Apple, who's one of their top executives. We'll probably hear from Sundar Pichai again from Google as CEO. They're on the list.
And so in those 2 weeks, what's going to happen? So it's basically another trial to say how they will deal with their monopoly in search.
That's right. And I guess one thing that's interesting is they're still pretty far apart. So Google's proposed remedies for itself are basically a slap on the wrist, and kind of embarrassing for anybody that studies these things.
So when you say a slap on the wrist, is it like a fine they're offering?
No,
what is Google offering them?
They're offering some restrictions on the way they do things, but nothing that touches on structural separation in any way, shape, or form. Nothing that that prevents them from doing an Apple-like deal. And so it's it's the bare minimum that the only way I can read it, and I'm just spitballing here, but is that they're not giving an inch right now because they think either they can do some sort of transactional deal settlement with the current administration, or that they can win on appeal, and they don't want to show their cards by moving the line in any way because it's so far removed from the decision itself.
Right, because if they got defensive, then they would kind of reveal their hand for when they go to appeal. You're saying
that's right. That's right.
And so, what is the Department of Justice? So, the Department of Justice is saying they should sell off Chrome, or is there anything else they're asking for?
They should sell off Chrome and divest Chrome. They may need to divest Android, but it basically says, let's see how that goes, but we can still do that. And then, very importantly, they're requiring them to share some data with other search engines that would help other search engines have a more level playing field. And as it relates to publishers, who, again, I do a lot of work I work for the publishers. It requires Google to allow publishers to narrowly define what Google can crawl and use data for. And so the publisher can say, hey, you can crawl my website for the purpose of search, but you cannot then use it to train your AI engines.
Fascinating.
And so, yeah.
And so the DOJ is pushing to make sure that's the case.
The DOJ is very smartly understanding that if they don't put real constraints on Google around AI, then they're only addressing past behavior, but they're not actually making sure that there's a level playing field going forward in which Google won't be able to just abuse and run over the AI marketplace too.
It really feels like we're kind of on the precipice of something changing in the next few years with the web, because if Google has to even share data from search, that will change. Like, we will get competition in search for the first time, really meaningfully in decades, like decades, I guess, like since the Lycos and Alta Vista days, because these two cases are so inherently intertwined.
Absolutely, yeah, and don't shortchange Gopher or web crawler in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there hasn't been other search engine since the late 90s.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I think I said Excite. Like So okay, changing gears before we wrap up. You've been at the FTC case with Meta. How's that going? And also, what is that about?
So that is about whether or not when Facebook at the time acquired Instagram and WhatsApp, that they were doing that to maintain their monopoly power in a market for personal social networking services. And so that is actually explicitly to break up Meta, so force them to divest WhatsApp and Instagram. And the testimony I saw was Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO, who was on the stand for, I don't know, roughly 7 or 8 hours, which is a lot for any CEO. He's the key witness. And so now they're rolling into the other witnesses. I think it's going well, to answer your question, yeah.
So what are some of the highlights of things that Marky Mark said?
He confirmed there's a lot of emails in that case. And unlike the Google case where there was real problems with preservation of evidence and there were emails that were and messaging that were deleted and all sorts of things that, by the way, Google's Kent Walker got slammed by the judge for not preserving evidence for like the third or fourth time now.
And you mentioned that during our interviews as well, that the judge was pissed about this.
The judge was pissed, and it came out in her opinion. Yeah. That
nice.
Abuse of attorney-client privilege. She basically said the way I read it was the only reason I'm not sanctioning you is because I found you liable of breaking the Sherman Act. So, and that's kind of what happened in the search case too. And it's kind of in the App Store case, they did get sanctioned. So there's the third antitrust loss that Google has in which they've been, nailed by the judge, and they've got more trials coming. So it's a problem for them. And so the flip side of that is that Facebook and Meta, there's a wealth of emails, and, Mark clearly ran the company very tightly and drove the product decisions very tightly. And he documented a lot of that in emails, and some of them are pretty damning. I think the one that has always gotten the most attention is emails where he discussed why would we buy Instagram and focused in on the reasons of neutralizing a competitor and buying time. So neutralizing Instagram and buying time. And a lot of the contemporaneous evidence shows that they were very, very concerned over a 1 year to 18-month period where Facebook was behind in moving to mobile. Instagram was growing very, very quickly, and they had screwed up by building the Facebook app for HTML5. That's a technical thing instead of their own native app, and they were freaking out. And there's a lot of emails about that.
That's fascinating. So, and kind of returning to what I was saying previously as well, it feels like the results of these trials could just fundamentally rebuild the web. Because if Instagram was competitive with Facebook, by which I mean they had to spin it off and make it its own company, and Google could no longer monopolize all the parts of the ads, it's going to change the economics of everything underlying the internet, because the internet is mostly paid for by ads.
That's right. That last part's really, really important, Ed, that you're making is, we're talking about a lot of the user behaviors and stuff, but there's $40 billion of US digital advertising that goes to those two companies, I would get, estimating. And so most of the growth in digital advertising over the last decade has gone to Google and Facebook in some way, shape, or form. And so how does it affect the advertising business becomes really, really important to all this.
And the way it would affect it is it could be cheaper for advertising, but it could also be more chaotic because, especially with Meta's advertising product, from what I understand, it's like almost the equivalent of Google Max in that you give Meta money and it goes into the greater metaverse. I mean that with a cap.
Yeah.
Damn, I can't say that shit. But but goes into the greater Meta series of products in the same way that Google Max, you put money in and it goes across all of Google's stuff. That being broken up would be like Google, like 90-something% of Meta's revenue is ads as well. Like this would destroy the company potentially.
Yeah, they're 97% of their business is advertising. And so you imagine a world where advertisers are buying through a different buy platform or a neutral one, let's call it, a neutral one that actually can buy ads on Instagram versus the Facebook app and actually make decisions on that in real time of what's best for the advertiser.
I feel like they also have to compete for business in the way they've never had to, or like justify their business and provide analytics that they don't already.
I've always asked the question of like when Facebook started to really get described as a toxic waste dump in like 2018, 2019, where they started to just run into some real difficulties. Like Instagram, if I were Instagram, I would act differently if I wasn't part of the larger corporation, right? And they probably Instagram would have put the screws to Facebook at that time, and vice versa, and so it really changes the dynamic of those two platforms where they're actually having to compete with each other, both for users and for ads. The parent company, the brand, is one of the least, according to like the Axios reputation survey, it's like number 99 or something like that in the 100 brands. So like the brand is significantly challenged despite the success of the company. So
So as we wrap up, it almost, I know that this show is not necessarily the most optimistic, but I kind of feel a little optimistic seeing all of this stuff. It feels like there could be a better internet that comes out of it.
I agree with that. And I also, make a broader point that it does make me optimistic to see courts doing what they're supposed to be doing, judges actually understanding the complexity of technology, having, attorneys that can describe it to the courts in a way that can be applied to antitrust law that's been around for more than a century. And by the way, it should be said too that these cases were brought by the Trump administration through a Biden administration. Now they're being enforced, and we're getting decisions under a Trump administration again. So they're incredibly bipartisan. And I had a chance to testify a few weeks ago in front of the Antitrust Committee, and that was incredibly bipartisan too. And so these are issues that stretch across the parties was pretty unique in this current moment.
And it kind of feels like the doomerists out there are saying, "Oh, they'll just pay off Trump," and it doesn't even feel. It feels like the administrations, both of them, kind of had the same willingness to do this.
That's right. I mean, the Wall Street Journal reported.
So obviously, we don't know.
Well, yeah, but the Wall Street Journal reported that Mark Zuckerberg met with the Trump administration or Trump himself, I think 3 times in the last few months, and offered to settle for $450 million, and the FCC wanted $30 billion. And so you can see that there's a pretty big delta between the two. And I think the Trump administration understands why these issues are issues regardless of party and politics, and too much power in the hands of too little people is always a problem. So
couldn't agree more. All right, Jason, where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Jason_Kint, on Blue Sky. They can always email me at DCN's website. I'm around. I'm always looking to engage. So thank you very much.
Such a pleasure to have you, sir. And you can, of course, find me on the internet. Google the man who killed Google search. That's how you find me. This has been Better Offline. I'm Ed Zitron. Thank you. You're going to hear a very similar message to follow.
Thank you for listening to Better Offline. The editor and composer of the Better Offline theme song is Matt Osowski. You can check out more of his music and audio projects at matosowski.com. MATTOSOWSKI.com. You can email me at easy@betteroffline.com or visit betteroffline.com to find more podcast links and, of course, my newsletter. I also really recommend you go to chat.wheresyouרד.at to visit the Discord and go to r/betteroffline to check out our Reddit. Thank you so much for listening.
Better Offline is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.